In 2013, there were more than 30 million flights recorded across the world. Only 11 of them crashed in mid-flight. With statistics like these, it's difficult to understand why 25% of the Earth's population has a severe phobia of flying. This film will explore how we can overcome this common fear in the air. Peter Owen is a hypnotist who specialises in aviobia and how the human brain registers and deals with this type of fear.
In terms of fear of flying, there's a difference between simple phobias and complex phobias. So for example, a simple phobia when it comes to fear of flying could be someone experienced turbulence and from then on the phobia kicked in. But sometimes you have complex phobias where it just appears to be a fear of flying, but really there's lots of other things involved. There's lots of different brain parts involved, but in particular there's the amygdala and the hypothalamus. And the amygdala takes information from different parts of the brain to do with sensory information. And part of its job is to determine whether a particular situation is safe or dangerous. If it decides it's dangerous, and that decision will be based on previous life experiences, it will then initiate the hypothalamus, which will kick in the fear and anxiety and the fight or flight response, which is great if you're being chased by a tiger, but not so good if you're sat on a plane waiting for it to take off. So what the sufferer has to do is bring up the fear. So for example, a fearful flyer may imagine that they're going through turbulence or taking off, and as soon as he's brought up the fear, then all the neural networks involved in the problem are all lit up. And then you begin the track, and throughout the track you hear specific noises, and when you hear these specific noises you have to tap with one hand when you hear one noise, the other hand with another, and then both hands together when you hear another. And what this does is, constantly throughout the track you'll hear a voice saying, get the thing in mind, you know the one. But then all of a sudden you have to change the hand that you're clicking. So that's repeatedly and systematically weakening the link between the thing you're thinking of and the response between the amygdala and the hypothalamus.
Captain Chris Rigby spent most of his career behind the controls of a Boeing 737. After retiring as a commercial pilot, he established Flight Simulator Midlands, an organisation developed to help people overcome their phobia of flying.
Once they see and understand where their fear comes from, then you can start to allocate more specific items. So once we've discussed the psychology of the fear, then we move through to how an aircraft flies, so they can understand what's happening to them once they're in the air. We then talk about security, air traffic control, all sorts of other issues connected with flying. And again, the key of it is understanding. Once you understand what's happening, you can rationalise it. If you can rationalise it, you can risk assess it, and then you can manage it in terms of fear, etc., etc.
I was helping a man in Peru once who had flown for most of his life without any fear, and then all of a sudden he developed this intense fear, and he used the usual techniques that I use, which often in just 10 minutes completely eradicate the problem. But in this instance it did reduce it, but didn't get rid of it completely. So following some questioning, it turned out when he was 8 he was at the airport with his parents, and his mum had to leave Peru for some reason, just for a few weeks. But in his mind he thought his mum was leaving forever, and on top of that his dad was very strict about never showing emotions in public. So as soon as we identified that particular memory, it became clear that one of his big fears was getting emotional in public, and if you get emotional on a plane you've got nowhere to run and hide.
Between 2012 and 2014, out of 100 million passengers, there was only recorded 0.0003 fatalities. David Woodward knows all too well about the rules and regulations airports must meet in order to keep pilots and passengers safe.
Away from the air traffic control side, we have an airport duty manager who will do 2 checks a day at the airfield. That normally involves a perimeter check, making sure that the perimeter of the airfield is safe, making sure there's no gaps in fences for animals and people to come through. We also do 2 runway inspections a day, which looks for things called FOD, foreign object debris, to make sure there's no big pieces which are going to hit aircraft propellers, and also to make sure that the runway surface and the manoeuvring area is safe, not flooded, not boggy, and there are no holes in the runway basically. Although we are actually involved in smaller aircraft, the airspace that we have is quite a lot smaller as well. So it's very important to remember that aircraft in the air are still, whether they're a 747 or a Piper PA-28, still lives that are in the air, and also lives on the ground that are at stake if things go wrong. And to inspect the runway surfaces and make sure that they are usable is very important, because of course we don't want any damage to aircraft or loss of life basically.
Well, normally when you're flying, you actually don't think of the people behind you. There's a wall there. It's almost as if you're in a private little world of your own with yourself and the other co-pilot. And I think that's the right way to be, because if you did worry about people behind you, then you'd probably be too nervous to do the job. Your job is to get yourself and the airplane on the ground, and of course if you do that sufficiently and safely, then everybody else is going to follow along with you. But you do need to look at the statistics overall with travelling. And if you take the UK for instance, per mile travelled in the UK, you're 7 more times likely to be killed on a train than you are on a plane. And yet nobody would think twice about getting on a train. And in terms of car mileage, you're 125,000 times more likely to get killed in a car than you are in a plane per mile travelled. If you flew every day of your life, every single day of your life to somewhere, for you statistically to be involved with an accident whereupon the aircraft, somebody was injured, not necessarily you, you'd have to fly for over 4,000 years, flying every day of your life.
Potential airline pilot must partake in a 26-month intensive training scheme, as well as privately reaching the mandatory 250-hour compulsory flight time experience. Unfortunately, the best way in some cases is to break the phobia down into sections.
I think the first thing is don't be embarrassed about it. Most people think that they're normal, there's something wrong with them if they have a fear of flying. I say quite the opposite. In fact, their fear is absolutely perfectly normal. It's their survival instinct kicking in a little bit earlier than somebody else's. I call it the lion and the mirror. And it's a little bit like if you were walking down a jungle path and you came to a bend in the jungle path, and I say, fine, let's walk around this corner, let's not worry about it. But you say to me, I've got a mirror in my pocket, let's have a look around that corner before we go charging around, just in case there's a lion around the corner. Now who's the cleverer? Me, just walk around the corner without thinking about it, or you with the mirror? And I think people who are frightened of flying are the people with the mirror. They want to know more before they commit themselves. And hopefully the courses I run give them that information, that knowledge, and hopefully then they can fly with some understanding and with comfort.